Good morning. Today marks the one-year anniversary of Joe Biden's swearing in and the one-year anniversary of one-party far-left Democrat rule in Washington. And the results are clear. America has faced a year of unprecedented crisis. The American people are facing an economic crisis, an energy crisis, a border crisis, an education crisis, a crime crisis, a worsening COVID-19 crisis, and a national security crisis. These crises are a direct result of the failed leadership and the far-left socialist agenda of Joe Biden and congressional Democrats. In Biden's economic crisis, wages have decreased 8 out of the 11 months since he took office, and inflation has skyrocketed, with 2021 being the worst year for inflation since 1981, before I was born, which makes my colleagues laugh and makes them feel older. Democrats have also enacted an anti-energy agenda that has caused energy prices to skyrocket, raising the national average for a gallon of gas to the highest price since 2014. Under Joe Biden's failed leadership, remote learning for many students is becoming the new normal. Failing to deliver on his promise to reopen schools in his first 100 days, Joe Biden and his administration are leaving kids behind. Joe Biden also promised to shut down the virus. House Democrats once again failed, and Americans are struggling to find tests as the pandemic worsens. This month, the U.S. broke the record for the most COVID hospitalizations at over 132,000, and more Americans died from COVID-19 in 2021 than 2020. Following a year of defunding the police rhetoric from President Biden and congressional Democrats, we saw a crime crisis and over a dozen major U.S. cities seeing record high homicide rates in 2021. And the border crisis continues to rage and worsen, with over 1.8 million illegal immigrants apprehended at our southern border since Joe Biden took office. And of course, President Biden's weakness on the world stage has left us with a national security crisis that has made our adversaries in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow stronger today than they were 1 year ago. Joining me today are my colleagues from the House Republican Conference, and I will turn it over to Jody Arrington from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And by the way, I was only 9 years old when we had that for you, since we're flaunting our youth and vigor this morning. Thank you all for being here. The best way to describe President Biden's first year in office is one self-inflicted crisis and disaster after another. From chaos at the southern border to rampant crime throughout our cities, from the botched withdrawal in Afghanistan to a bungled COVID response. Unfortunately, Biden's economic policies and recovery plan has been no exception, characterized by incompetence, incoherence, and irrational policy decisions, and the results have been devastating for our country. In the months after COVID hit our shores, we all worked together with our Democrat colleagues to pass legislation and provide relief to our fellow Americans, our fellow families that were struggling, and our small businesses and the frontline workers. Despite campaign promises from President Biden, he broke from this bipartisanship and jammed through the largest multi-trillion-dollar partisan spending bill in the nation's history. Disguised as COVID relief, when the vast majority was not going to COVID, hundreds of billions of dollars. We're going to bail out blue states and Democrat union bosses, giveaways to green industries, and a parade of Democrat pet projects. Buried in this borrowing and spending mania were progressive policies that sideline labor, paying people more to stay at home than to go back to work, and stripping work requirements from welfare programs. On top of this unbridled spending, Biden launched unilateral assaults on oil and gas, choking the lifeblood of our economy and crushing consumers with high energy costs when they could least afford it. And as if that wasn't enough, Biden's liberty-infringing vaccine mandates forced millions of American workers to retire or be fired. All these taken together have created an unprecedented and unnecessary economic crisis. Inflation surging to a 40-year high, real wages plummeting, robbing working families of the thousands of dollars that they desperately need. 1 in every 5 Americans can't afford to heat their homes. And with millions of Americans unemployed, a stagnant workforce participation, small businesses are still struggling to hire people and to keep their doors open. The president made what I believe is a disconnected and outlandish statement yesterday. He said that we've made enormous progress. He said that we're better off today than we were a year ago. Mr. President, tell that to the working families in West Texas and throughout this great country who are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling, even before COVID, to put food on their table, gas in their tank, and keep the lights on in their homes. Tell that to the millions of hardworking Main Street business owners who have had a help wanted sign hanging on their door for the past year and risk losing their lifelong dream. Mr. President, tell that to the farmers and ranchers in West Texas who can't get their products to market, can't get parts for their tractors, and they can't afford 300% increase in seed, fertilizer, and other input costs. Mr. President, stop blaming everyone else. Stop pushing this radical agenda and work with us to solve the problems and address the real needs of our fellow Americans. And now I yield to my friend from Louisiana, Representative Julie Ledlow.
Thank you, Congressman Arrington. As a former classroom educator and a mom of two, I believe that addressing the issues we face in education are of the utmost importance. We all know that American schools have been in crisis, as students and teachers have found themselves in unprecedented circumstances. When schools went virtual nearly 2 years ago, parents joined their children in the virtual classroom, and many were concerned with what they witnessed. When parents across this country tried to voice their concerns and engage in the learning process, they often were shut out, and in some cases, wrongly labeled domestic terrorists. When it comes to education, this administration and the other side wants to exclude parents and have government do the job on their own. They think that a group of bureaucrats in Washington should determine the beliefs and values that we teach our children. That will never work because these are our children, not the government's. It takes a family, not a bureaucracy, to raise a child. A great education is the most essential building block in the foundation of a child's future. As Republicans, we believe that education works when it's a true partnership between parents and the learning environment that works best for their child. We don't think that the relationship between a family and educator needs to be adversarial. Schools should work hand in hand with families, both sides bringing new ideas to the table that will always put our children first. That is why over 100 of my Republican colleagues and I have joined together to introduce the Parents' Bill of Rights, common sense legislation that brings transparency and accountability by giving parents the right to view their child's curriculum, allowing them to protect their child's privacy, keeping them informed of violent activity at school, and ensuring that government bureaucrats can never shut parents out again. I want to be clear, we're not saying that Washington should force directives on local schools, but we are telling them that they must open their doors for families. We also know that it is essential for our children to be learning in person. The statistics tell us that students show more academic and social growth when they can interact with their teachers and peers. Congress sent billions to school districts and states to make sure they could safely reopen their doors. We didn't spend that money just for them to simply close their doors again. It's clear that we need a broad shift in our nation's education policy. America's future depends on it. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to my esteemed colleague from New Mexico, Congresswoman Yvette Harrell.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. And I think we can look at this 1 year and just pick one word out of the dictionary: hypocrisy. This year's been full of it. I mean, today the people of New Mexico and Americans are worse off than they were just 1 year ago. Let's face it, gas prices are higher than the wall. I mean, our school kids are locked out and criminals run free. Our paychecks and our presidential promises are worth less now than ever before. President Biden and Nancy Pelosi have taken our country on a road trip to the 1970s, before you were born. And nobody's having a good time. In fact, I think sometimes Joe Biden thinks it's 1970. Look, this is America. Presidencies don't last forever, but the will of the American people will. People are free. They know this country. They know their homes. They know their industries. And they want to live in the nation that most have fought for and stood up for and respected. And right now, we are in crisis mode. We have a border that's wide open. We have turned every state in this country into a border state, thanks to this president. We have a moral responsibility to finish the wall, to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of our families, our communities, our first responders, and most importantly, our children. We really need to be talking about truth. Instead of sending innovations overseas, why aren't we, innovations overseas, we're sending jobs overseas. We're not giving people choices in energy. We're forcing them to go down a path we are not ready to go down. And we have a responsibility to bring every single American home from Afghanistan and protect every single American on our soil. So looking back at this year, what have we got? A whole lot of nothing. But we've got people that have the ear of the American folks. Our constituents are telling us daily, they're feeling the heat. They're paying more. They're making tough choices now. Is it food or is it medication? Is it heating their homes or is it trying to put gas in the car? We're here on behalf of our constituencies, and we're here on behalf of this country because we are the voice of those with more common sense than what we see in the White House right now. So I am pleased to stand here ready to fight for our freedoms with my colleagues, and I hope that 2022 will be a much better year, especially in November. That's my favorite month. And with that, I will send it over to Michael Waltz.
Yep. The number one job of the commander-in-chief is to keep this country safe. And yesterday, Joe Biden literally threw the Ukrainian people under the bus by hedging and essentially, according to the Ukrainian foreign minister, given the Russians a green light and given Putin a green light if they only make a minor incursion. Words matter when you're in this type of crisis, and words matter when you're standing at the presidential podium. Now, he may have used his team to try to spin and backtrack afterwards, but Putin got the message, the Kremlin got the message, the Ukrainian people got the message, and I have to tell you, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranian regime, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they all got the message too. And in Ukraine in particular, instead of using deterrence, instead of stopping this aggression on the front end, we continue to hear about how tough President Biden's going to be after Russia invades. I was just out in Ukraine a month ago, and I have to tell you, talking to Ukrainian officials, they said, thanks a lot. It doesn't do us a lot of good to get tough after Russian tanks are sitting in our capital. And just in 1 year, we have lost 2 allies and 2 democracies. And I just can't understate, and I think we need to make this connection, how much Biden's failed energy policies have played into Russian aggression. By shutting down pipelines here, by regulating fracking, by stopping drilling of American oil and gas companies, he has enriched Putin's oil and gas companies. Every time you see that price of oil, that barrel go higher and higher, Putin gets richer and richer and more aggressive. He has also said, he said just yesterday, he makes no apologies for his decision on Afghanistan. I can think and point to you right now tens of thousands of Afghans, freedom-loving Afghans, who stood with us against extremism. They deserve an apology. The 13 Gold Star families that weren't able to spend this past holiday with their loved ones, they deserve an apology. Our closest allies who are being hunted down as we speak, I just received a beheading video this morning. There's a veterans group who's over there right now trying to save these people on their own dime with their own aircraft because their government won't help. They deserve an apology. And the millions of Afghan girls and women, they deserve one too. Afghanistan's on the brink of starvation. Just 6 months ago, these people, under an imperfect government to be sure, were standing with us against extremism in line with our values. Now it's a terrorist superstate led by a Taliban caliphate, and the intelligence is clear. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are developing the capability to once again strike the homeland in just under 1 year of this Biden presidency. Meanwhile, Iran is on the march to a nuclear weapon. We've gone from Abraham Accords, historic, amazing steps forward towards peace, to rockets flying onto Israeli cities. In China, we're on the verge of sending our athletes and companies to Beijing and flying the American flag, giving the Chinese Communist Party this global propaganda platform with nearly 6 million people dead around the world from COVID, not to mention nearly 1 million Muslims in concentration camps undergoing forced rape, forced torture, and forced extermination. It's an ongoing genocide as we speak, and a diplomatic boycott is just a joke. Meanwhile, in the middle of that, the Chinese Navy is now larger than ours. Their Space Force is launching more into space than the rest of the world combined, including the United States. And we get from Joe Biden a defense cut with including inflation. And I'll just end with this. I think this president has the worst human rights record of any modern American presidency. And you may think that's an over-the-top statement, but when you have, according to international NGOs, 30 to 40% of girls being sexually assaulted or sold into human trafficking on our southern border, when you have, again, the forced rape, mass rape, and sterilization of women in the Uyghurs, just ask the Afghan girls and just ask the Cuban people who heard nothing but silence from this White House as they stood for freedom. America and the rest of the world deserves better, and they deserve American leadership. Unfortunately, we're just 1 year in. We have 3 years to go, but I don't think we can realistically expect anything but more of the same, because the same team that was around then Vice President Biden and around Obama is now leading our national security approach, and it is a fundamentally flawed approach of America last and concessions first. And our adversaries see that as weakness, and they see that as opportunity, and you are going to continue to see them on the march unless this president completely does a 180-degree turn. But I think with the stubbornness, with the obstinance, with the pride, sadly, that we saw yesterday, I don't think we can expect that. And prosperity around the world, why this matters to the American people, has been underscored by American leadership and the United States military since World War II. And that credibility is now under a serious and dangerous erosion. We are moving backwards in the world. And with that, I will stop and hand over to Whip Steve Scalise, and go Noles.
Go Tigers, and good to be with you. What a difference a year makes. 1 year ago today, Joe Biden took the oath of office as President of the United States, and he walked into a White House that had not one, not two, but 3 different vaccines on the brink of approval because of President Trump's Operation Warp Speed. And not just 3 safe and effective vaccines, he also had a number of therapeutics. He had an economy that was poised for a strong rebound. We had border security, we had energy security, we had peace accords between Israel and Muslim nations. That was just 1 year ago today. And what did President Biden say yesterday to give an accounting for this last year? He literally just doubled down on all of the failures that we've seen this last year. If you were even grading on a curve, Joe Biden would get an F for failure. And it's the American people that he's failed. Those hardworking families that go to the grocery store and are paying 20% more for bacon, and he doesn't think that's a problem. When you think about the border crisis, where now every state in the nation is a border city and community, because you've got drugs coming in across our border, and now fentanyl and other drugs killing people in every community in America, because Joe Biden not only stopped building the wall, but sent a message all across the world, not just South and Central America, that our border is open. You look at the energy crisis, and of course, people are longing for those days where they were paying less than $2 a gallon. I'm not talking about decades ago when Elise was just a twinkle in her parents' eyes. I'm talking about a year ago when people were paying less than $2 a gallon because we were making our own energy here in America, and we were making enough to where we could ship it around the world and help our allies. We were undercutting Russia. We were undercutting OPEC nations. And then you fast forward. First day in office, Joe Biden kills the Keystone Pipeline, sends a message that he doesn't want America to be energy secure. And it wasn't because he was against pipelines or fossil fuels, because he greenlighted the Nord Stream 2 pipeline so that Putin could have more leverage over Europe. He begged OPEC nations to produce more oil, which, by the way, emit more carbon than oil made here in the United States. If you actually want to save the planet and lower carbon emissions, make the oil here, make products here in America. It's not just good for our economy and jobs and those hardworking families who he's kicked to the curb over and over again, but it gets our economy back going, and it sends a message to those other countries that we're going to have strong leadership in America. Weakness has consequence. We saw that in Afghanistan. For the president to say that he would do it over again the same way, my God, what a frightening thought it is to us here in the United States, to our allies all around the world, but also to our adversaries. We know Russia was watching what happened in Afghanistan. We know that China was watching, Iran. All of our adversaries around the world were watching, and they saw the weakness, and they're capitalizing on it right now. Do you think the strong, wonderful people of the Ukraine think it would be a minor incursion if Putin moved tanks into Ukraine, even a piece of the Ukraine? Of course they don't, but he does. And by showing that weakness, it has costs all around the world. Americans are tired of paying the price for this president's failures. They want and know what's better for America. We as House Republicans are fighting for those hardworking families too. And we're going to be rolling out a bold agenda to confront the many crises that Joe Biden has created. How to restore freedom, how to restore opportunity, how to restore hope for people who have given up. That's what we stand for. That's what we're going to be fighting for. And we're going to be rolling that agenda out. And as we work to take back the House, to finally put a check and balance on this failed Biden administration, our leader has been relentless in leading the charge and pointing to that better place, that shining city on the hill that we will get back to, because America is still a great nation, but we're a nation that has real troubles right now because of Joe Biden's failed leadership. Our leader who's going to lead us back to the majority, Kevin McCarthy.
I want to thank all the members for being here. We would have had everybody be outside, but it was just weather, a little bad. If you go back 1 year ago, it wasn't just the swearing in of President Joe Biden. It was the majority of the Democrats having Congress and then having the Senate. One party, socialist rule for 1 year. No one thought we could do that much damage in that short amount of time. I listened to the president yesterday for nearly 2 hours. For 2 hours, he blamed everyone but himself. Biden used to say the buck stopped with him, but not anymore. This isn't about the president. This isn't about the Democrats. This should be about America. The Americans out there that have worked hard, they've gone through a pandemic, a rough economy. You would think they would focus on them. But the Democrats' very first bill, H.R. 1, the one they put the most importance on, was surely only about the Democrats maintaining power. If we look at the accomplishments, we got an economy that is damaged. We've got cities and streets that are dangerous. We have adversaries that feel emboldened. Is that a good song? I thought it was Lee Greenwood. We got a border that's not secure. It's not just 1.8 million people coming here illegally. It's the fentanyl that's coming across. It starts in China and comes into America. It doesn't stop along the border cities. It goes to every reach in every city across America. There's enough fentanyl in America today to kill every single person 7 times over. Or maybe you ask the question, not just would the president or vice president go visit the problem, but where are these people coming from? 160 different countries. There are people that are on the terrorist watch list that have been caught coming across this border. Why are they coming here? Who are they talking to? And what do they have planned? We watched another year where our schools are being shut. We go into the grocery stores in America and you wonder where you are because there's nothing there to buy. But a president who brags about what he did with the supply chain. Ships are still waiting on the outskirts of California. We pay more for gasoline with the projections only to go higher. The answer from the Democrats and the majority is to look to OPEC, not to American workers who could make us energy independent, as we've proven before. This is what we've gotten in 1 year. But an interesting question that the president asked yesterday as he blamed everyone else. He asked, what are Republicans for? We want to answer that question for him. We're for kids in school. We're for food on the shelves. We're for America independence and energy, lowering the gas price so it doesn't harm us. We're for stopping runaway spending so we don't create inflation like they have. We're for a secure border with an immigration system that works. We're for a world that is safe. We want our streets back. We want security and we want safety. We don't want another headline what we read in California just this week. A young UCLA student. All the hopes and dreams of the future. Being murdered by somebody out on bail. Same majority that raised money to get people out on bail. I think America deserves better. And we will work with anyone that wants to do that. I was most concerned about not just the president continuing to blame everybody else, but I cannot imagine, based upon the president's own decisions on what he did in Afghanistan, to look the American public in the eye and I quote, I make no apologies for what I did. For what he did. He promised the American people he would not leave till all Americans were out. He closed Bagram first, let the prisoners out, and now we have 13 Gold Star families. They deserve an apology. The president said on Ukraine, a minor incursion. If you read the tweet today, the president of Ukraine, we want to remind the great powers that there are no minor incursions in small nations, just as there are no minor casualties and a little grief from the loss of loved ones. It's a 1-year anniversary of the Democrats' control. It's also the 100th anniversary of the Soviet Union creation. With Putin wanting to put all the pieces back together again. Looking to the leader of the world with 2 hours offering the opportunity to go to Ukraine. Never in my life did I believe a president of the United States would say that. North Korea launches missiles again. Next month, the world will go to China for the Olympics to reward them for bringing in COVID and killing millions of people across this world. We can do much better. That's what this body believes, and this is what we'll work for. With that, let me open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask, there's been a lot of bipartisan concern after President Biden's minor incursion comments yesterday. What should Congress's role be if Russia is to invade Ukraine?
The first thing you want to do is make sure and deter them not to invade. The only thing we've heard from the administration is things that would happen after you invade, and a president said a small incursion will be less than a big incursion. It shouldn't just be America. NATO and everybody else should stand up and say this is wrong. Do not let history repeat itself just when the Olympics is about to happen again. And Putin could sit on a world stage and said, Biden allowed it. I think we should speak with one voice. I watched in the Senate, you had one of the actions this president take was shutting down a pipeline in America, but opening one up for Putin. And then when there was a vote in the Senate, as 100,000 Russian troops are on the border of Ukraine, the administration joined with Russia to lobby to make sure that was defeated. I would have thought they would join together as Americans to make sure you sent a very clear message. So what should Putin read from this? That they'd even work to make sure they keep my pipeline, and then he said you could have a minor incursion. That is all the missteps. Has he learned nothing from Afghanistan? Just a few short months ago? Remember when he stood before the American public and said, oh no, the Army could sustain itself for long periods of time. But it's not just Biden who should be blamed. Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff took an intel committee and created it into a political committee. Why weren't they watching what was happening in Ukraine? Because they were more busy worrying about impeaching people. It's the entire Democrat majority. And what's so interesting, if you want to know if they're proud of what they've done, why are they setting new records with retirements? Because they don't want to stand up to the American public. They too don't want to say the buck stops with them. Yes, ma'am.
When you're talking about responding with NATO and everything, are you for sending combat troops, U.S. combat troops to Ukraine if Russia does invade?
If Russia doesn't, you know what you should do if you want Russia not to invade? Give them deterrent not to do it. You've got the ability to put weapons. You've got the ability to put individuals in a place that would say this would not be the place to come. Why are we talking about everything after they do it? Because after they do it, you can't put it back in the bottle. I would think we should speak with one voice. But the voice that the president said yesterday is not the voice I think any other American would speak with. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so yesterday the president, speaking on opposition from Republicans, asked, what are Republicans for? So your reaction to him saying Republicans are refusing to work across the aisle with this administration. Second question, are there elements...
Let's back up. Where did I say we refuse to walk across the aisle? So let me walk you through what has happened in the last year. The number of letters, first when the border became a major crisis because this president changed the executive orders. A number of us went down to the border, I believe, in February. At that instance, as we were working with the Border Patrol, seeing what was happening, we uncovered that there were people on the terrorist watch list that were being arrested. We said in a press conference, the Democrats challenged us, said I was lying. We found out it was true. We sent a letter to the president, since he's never been to the border except in his 40-some year of elected office, drove by San Antonio one day. We said, let us come down and meet with you. Didn't respond. In every single issue, not just the border, the mandates, the inflation, transportation, others, we said, let's meet and work with you, Mr. President. Because we listened to his words 1 year ago today where he said he would work with both sides, that he was going to be a president for all. No. Everything he has done is to have one party rule, one side vote for it and deny. When he talks about Build Back Better, has he ever met with us about it? But please, go on with your question.
Well, that's the second part. Are there elements of Build Back Better that your caucus would support, like universal pre-K, for example?
Well, let's take an example of the president coming into office. Prior to the president in office, we were in a pandemic. Every single bill we did dealing with COVID was bipartisan. We sat in a room with leaders on the other side, administration, and we worked it all out. The minute he became president, and they controlled the House and Senate, no longer were Republicans invited into the room. And what's the first thing they passed? Purely on partisan basis, $1.9 trillion. Put that in perspective. When the financial markets crashed and we needed to fund the economy, we were talking about $800 billion, $1.9 trillion after we had passed all the other bills, with only 9% going to COVID. They wanted to do it only on party rule. We warned them then that you would create inflation. 1 year later, we were right. 1 year later, when we need tests that he was going to promise, they weren't a part of that. More Americans have died from COVID last year than the year before, and we have vaccines. This is a president that quoted in his campaign, if you reached a certain level of casualties, the person shouldn't maintain being a president. Every action he's taken has been partisan. Every outcome, we have warned him prior to taking that action what would happen. Yes, sir.
Perhaps a question for the conference chairwoman, but
Sure.
over the last couple of years, a lot of members of the conference have been critical of the proxy voting, saying it wasn't right. But now you got members of the conference using the proxy voting. Have minds changed about whether it should be used or not?
You go right ahead.
These are rules that Nancy Pelosi has put into place without any discussion with Republicans. These are the rules of this House. One rule, another that is unprecedented, is not allowing all reporters in this room. She has run this institution like an authoritarian leader. When it comes to proxies, the Republican majority, and I don't want to speak for the leader here, but we believe in in-person voting. When Republicans win back the House, that's what we are committed to.
Have used the proxy voting though, ma'am.
It's the rules of the House.
It's the rules of the House right now. So have a number of colleagues on both sides of the aisle. These are the rules that Nancy Pelosi sets. She sets the mask rule. She sets the magnetometer rules. I oppose both of those rules, but we use them. I use those rules because those are the rules that she has set. Thanks.
Let me tell you, when Nancy Pelosi took in the House, this Congress, she changed the rules of the House that never happened before. I think the American public, just as we honored those in the health field, the grocery store, the truck driver, that they would continue to work, I think they'd expect their leaders to work. What happens when you do proxy voting, and how it was created at the very beginning, is if you had a problem with COVID during that time period or others, what we have found is members use it for other reasons, but they're not here to work. She also passed a bill that for the first 4 months, no bills had to go through committee. She then also changed the rules that the minority could not have an amendment, a motion to recommit. All things that have been around for the history of Congress. Why? Who does it empower? Her. She has all the votes in her pocket. You don't take a bill through committee. You get greater control. So when we talk about 1 year with one party control, it's something that we've never seen happen before. I think people should show up to be paid. I think people should work together across the aisle. And if you're here, that's when you can make that happen. And fortunately, in the next year, we'll change that. Yes, sir.
Leader McCarthy, one thing that resulted from the big spending bill that Democrats did when Joe Biden first took office, with the checks and the monthly payment for parents, is a likely reduction in poverty, and especially child poverty. What do you think of that? How important is that in the context of the other economic things you've been talking about, like inflation and labor shortages?
You know what's interesting? You didn't mention what also happened with those checks? The Boston bomber got a check in jail. You know what the Republicans offered? To make sure that didn't happen. But the Democrats said no. The amount of waste, when you go back and see, offered going through, we believed we had the data to help those small businesses that need it to be able to stay open and go. But they chose to allow prisoners to have checks, and we think that's wrong. So what we're for is to make sure more people can work, more people have prosperity, more kids can go to school. Back to school, back to health, back to safety. It's pretty simple. We just hope the president would agree with that as well. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Leader. On the Senate side, there seems to be some bipartisan momentum for reforming the Electoral Count Act. I think some members of your conference have also possibly expressed interest in doing that. So I was wondering if you could characterize how real that momentum is, what the likelihood of that is, and if there is support for it, is that in a way an acknowledgement that some members of the conference either abused or at least tried to get around it last year?
I'll take the end of your question first. No. Just like any bill out there, in every Congress we look, it's an old piece of law, so you can always modernize it in others, and there's nothing wrong with looking at any piece of legislation. I would think we'd look at a lot of things to make things accountable from that perspective. So thank you all very much. Have a good weekend.
Fuel and fire.
Yeah, no, happy to.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to get your name and introduce myself. I work for the conference.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarland.
We'll take yours with
Yeah.
Get the angle. No, hey, get it this way. This is good. Okay. Hey, we'll stand here.
All right, what's that?
We'll get this to Alan, okay? Okay.
All right. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. All right,
Okay,
let me get one.
we're doing an official one now, okay?
All right. All right. 3, 2, 1. And 3, 2, 1.
Now, do you have a card with you?
I don't,
No,
but
hey,
I'm
again-
interning with Congressman McClintock.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, hey, hey, he is a stalwart.
Congressman McClintock?
Yeah.
He's awesome. He's
No,
awesome.
he really, he's for freedom.
His office is trying to help me find a full-time job here.
Well, I want you to get the resume to us now, but let's get